Hi everyone. Welcome to our sixth episode, chapter 3. We had 2 chapters already about measure what matter, and within this chapter, we are going to mainly discuss about tracking and stretching aspect of OKR. But keep in mind, this OKR is 4-pillar or superpower, which is focus, alignment, tracking, and stretching, that it goes hands in hands together. We cover a little bit of tracking and stretching in the previous episodes as well, but we're going to go and deep dive in tracking and stretching within this chapter. I still have Willem and Ped with me in this chapter, and we are going to discuss about the tracking and stretching. All right, I'll pass it to you, Willem. What do you think when it's come to tracking and stretching, and how did you like these two superpower?
So for me, tracking has always been something that I've intrinsically had to deal with as part of my career that I've chosen because I work primarily in data. And when I talk about that, it's how companies use data to be, well, let's use the buzzword, more data-driven, and then to take out of that the learnings that's there, be them positive or negative, to drive some sort of ambitious goal within the company, and then sort of motivate their teams as well, not just on a high-level executive leadership, but also then teams that are actually sort of doing the work. This is primarily for me quite interesting because I've spent a lot of time working with data teams. So if you look at normally your costs within an IT structure, data teams suck up a lot of that cost because what they do is persist a lot of information on normally a very big scale that takes a lot of compute to essentially turn into something that's valuable for the company to make some strategic decisions around it. It's not directly tied, but it is necessary essentially to support that. And then when you use something like being more data-driven within a company, at the very least, you have something to associate this cost and this effort necessary to sort of like make that happen within the company. This is where I feel OKRs lend something very important, because if you don't have the KPI, if you don't have the KR, how do you measure this? It's fine if you're a small company and you could potentially hook directly into whatever portal you have or whatever Excel sheet you currently use at that point. But once you need a big team and once you're a big enough organization that runs a operation that depends on a lot of data to essentially extract this learnings from, it becomes very hard. And OKRs for me is something that resonated and that I could have used in previous conversations that I've had with either data stewards, data owners, or with teams that do a lot of data engineering. Also on an architecture level, I might have architected things a little bit differently because I now have a different frame of reference where I understand a little bit more about what KRs are and how they can be related to, let's say, strategic objectives within a company. That, at least for me, spoke to it. It's a part of the book that I really, really liked. And that gave me sort of, I would say, a new perspective as well as a new language to sort of talk to people about that I feel is more relevant to the people that need to make the decisions within an organization. And I'm going to hand it over to you. I mean, when it comes to sort of like tracking and stretching, how have you sort of found that and how did the book sort of help you?
I think for me, the having regular one-on-ones with every team member that reported to me, and then me having one-on-ones with my manager, were very key in, the alignment aspect to some degree, but of course that tracking leads to the alignment, right? If I'm falling behind a certain KR, is it because other people aren't aligned to it and helping me? Is it because I'm doing something that I should be doing differently? Having those conversations around your tracking points and basically measuring, we have a waterfall for Agile. We make sure that we kind of stick to that sort of angle at most times, hopefully, ideally. But, this should be a scaling up of achieving that stretch goal or getting as close as we can to that stretch goal. And if we start to plateau or if it starts to go in the wrong direction, we want to surface that as quickly as possible. You don't want to wait until the end of the period, whether that's a quarter or 6 months or whatever, only then to discover, we missed it by a lot, because by then it's too late. Right. So the tracking, to me, the most important aspect of it was our ability to quickly get the metrics and look at them and then adjust if necessary, because they're not going the right way, or to pour more fuel on the fire. If we see something like super skyrocket, then, hey, let's do more of that, right? Let's see what else we can do to jack that up. In essence, I think the way I succeeded in having the most buy-in from people that I did these one-on-ones with was to try to find ways where whatever it was we were tracking somehow aligned to their career path. It's not as easy as just saying it. You have to put some effort into it, but I can tell somebody, look, your key result, you're saying you're going to deliver this feature. Let's make the aspiration, because I know you can deliver that feature. I have no doubt, but let's make the tracking of it a time, right? Let's say that I would expect a junior engineer would take 4 sprints, and a mid-level, your mid-level, let's say, right, would take 3 sprints, and a senior would take 2. So let's say you do it in 2. Let's make that your aspirational goal. And if you reach it, awesome, man, you're doing senior level work. And that helps me justify, accelerating your career path towards that job type. Mehdi, you remember, this is how we used to do things at Monster, even without OKRs, but OKRs make it even simpler, right? You can use these metrics for the benefit of the company because you're getting the work done faster, right? But also for the benefit of the individual and for them to understand how they fit into the organization. The other thing that does is it exposes when it's very, very difficult to find something in your objectives, in your key results that aligns to that individual's career path. It exposes something that is sometimes difficult to deal with. And that is maybe that individual's misaligned to what the organization needs. Sometimes you might have a mobile engineer, but you don't need a mobile app. I mean, that's an extreme example, but whatever the case may be, you might come up in those situations, and it helps to either identify it as quickly as possible and then decide on the adjustment. Can we utilize your skills in a different area that's beneficial for everybody, et cetera? And if that person really says, no, I want to be a mobile engineer, I don't want to contribute in other ways, then this is a friendly, separation, basis of the separation where you can give them a good recommendation and then move on to a company that does require their abilities. That's kind of like I guess in a nutshell, the most important aspect of the tracking for me is quick reviews, fast cycles of feedback, and then quickly adjusting to see, can we catch up? Can we even outdo, where the metrics are going? So we're not surprised by the outcome, positive or negative, at the end of the time box.
Right. One quote that really attracted my attention in this book was by Edward Deming. In God we trust, all other must bring data. And when it's come to measurement, it was quite interesting that John Doerr started the chapter with this quote. And it was mentioning also this OKR, usually the scoring system, especially the one that they are using in Google, it's green between 0 or 7 to 1.0. Yellow is between 0.4 to 0.6, and red between 0.0 and 0.3. These are the scaling that they have within Google and so many other companies that they are just going based on that. But at the same time, this is something that we supposed to learn from the experience as well. There is a quote that they was mentioning, we don't learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience. And reflecting on OKR, the objective score, self-assessment and lesson learned, there are things that within the post cycle of reflection, they are usually go through it, and they need to come, and especially for committed OKR, elaborate what went wrong so they become better on measurement in next cycle. And the tracking aspect of OKR make this tool much more powerful, and also ensure that you are going right direction. And when you are measuring things and you see that you are not achieving that, you can pivot on the right moment and ensure that you get back on track. In this book, the example that they was mentioning for philanthropies, a really big one like Bill Gates Foundation and Bono, that they are going really on achievable objective and they want to make it happen. This tool, if it's not in place, billions of dollars go to waste because they don't know whether they are in the right direction or not. And it gives them pretty good visibility, not only from the individual level, but from the whole objective level, where they're standing. Stephen Covey have this quote, make sure the ladder is leading against the right wall. If it's not, the faster you go, it takes you to the wrong place faster.
Yeah, I think also when it comes for me to to tracking in general, it's very important to consider different perspectives. And I think, Ped, we also mentioned this very briefly in chapter 1 as well. It's just that take account of the fact that within an organization, there's different perspectives that consider tracking from different angles on the same thing. You need to make sure that you include these different perspectives. I think, Mehdi, onto your point as well, when we talk about the nonprofit organization for Bono, one of the things that rang true for me was that then in isolation, they said, cool, this is what we want to focus on. And then just randomly actually had a conversation with someone that's there that they're trying to help. And they just basically mentioned them like, oh, sure, have you asked any one of us with regards to what we feel these objectives sort of should be? And I think this is just an important thing to understand, is that when we talk about OKRs help with this horizontal and bottom-up prioritization and focus, it's very important that the tracking is also considered within that specific scope, is that on every level within an organization, across teams, everybody does have a different perspective that might be very, very valuable with regards to what's happening here. And then to add on to that, I don't necessarily think that even a red within a KR is a bad thing. And I think this is normally something that's very stigmatized within a company, is that anything red is bad. But it could also be a very interesting sort of unexplored opportunity as to why this is. You'd never know what kind of value you scratch when you start doing something and it just doesn't end up the way you think it was going to end up. There's a couple of like super, super interesting stories out there with regards to failures that turned out in time, not just at that moment, to be something that's extremely exciting. I'm thinking about just Post-it notes in general that took a couple of decades before it's now one of 3M's most selling products that they essentially have. But I pass the question off to you, Ped. Has there been a situation in an organization that you've been part of where a red in a KR was like aha moment, or that led to an interesting conversation?
Well, yeah, one comes to mind where it was red due to, well, it was red because it was red. The actual goal wasn't achieved. The progress made towards the goal demonstrated that stretching is not something to shy away from. And the example I'm thinking of is when I worked at Photobook, we had a good relationship with one of the local universities to provide interns for the industry-based learning, where we would bring in a batch of them together and kind of first we would disperse them through different teams working on, mobile, backend, DevOps, database, et cetera. And then for the second half of that IDL period, we bring them back together and give them some big, fat, hairy goal that essentially is a major stretch, right? Without any expectation that they'll actually be able to deliver something commercializable, but that, they could have something really cool on their resume and we would have a proof of concept for something that we could then take on, in the long run. And one of these teams actually built several machine learning based features, which our objective was reduce the time it takes for someone to build a photo book through our API, through our web interface or mobile interface by 50%. And that's a massive undertaking, because talking about people like selecting, a few dozen pictures out of thousands on their phone, for example, right? Mm-hmm. And that just takes time, and it's a matter of opinion. But they used machine learning. They used, every trick in the book they could figure out how to cluster images by location, and then based on the contents of those categories that they were able to recognize from the pictures, maybe they could categorize this as a trip to Paris, and then look up in our templates, is there a Euro trip template that would work nicely? And so they did everything they could, where the user at the end of the day still has full control, but they start with a built photo book instead of a blank canvas. And that does tend to cut around 50% of your time. It ended up actually doing that. And so the interesting thing was that these guys going into it, these interns, they had no idea that this was difficult. And I did everything I could to keep it. I was like, this is normal. It's what we do every day.
Yeah,
so
just make it happen.
Get cracking, right? Like, yeah, sure. Let me know if you need help. Or I actually asked some of the leads also to help them out. And I made sure they knew, don't tell them it's difficult, right? And they delivered. The amazing part was they delivered. That delivery of a proof of concept to the rest of the team was triggered a complete different perspective on stretching. They now saw a concrete example where a bunch of kids that didn't know good enough to say, no, this is impossible, went and tried it and got it done. And like now they kind of question themselves is, why am I saying that it can't be done? Maybe it can be. We don't know. Let's try, right? Like it completely changed the approach. So that's, the example that comes to mind when it comes to, that big stretch.
I think it's an interesting one because it's something that I deal with quite a lot. It's that persisting imposter syndrome, especially when you've climbed to a certain part of your career where you feel that you need to have a well-rounded competency in every single field of technology to try and do something valuable in there. And that is such an interesting one where, with regards to just the stretching, was essentially underpinned by just a change of perspective, something new, a new perspective. Wow. Okay, cool. That's a nice one. What do you reckon, Minnie?
Right. And, in Build to Last, Jim Collins coined the term BHAG, Big Hairy Audacious Goal. And he also mentioned all the good organization, they have this North Star sometimes. They aim for something really significant. And this is an enabler. Like within Google, Larry Page was mentioning, we want always people have healthy disregard for impossible, that they know that this is stretching goal, but at the same time healthy, right? In a way that is achievable, but not too much. It enable the team. It give them some kind of motivation and goal per se. Larry Page was mentioning, when you aim for the star, if you cannot reach it, you might reach the moon, and that is itself is going to give you a quite good accomplishment that, hey, we aim for this, we could not reach it, it was 0, but the achievement that we have was quite significant.
Yeah, and I think, the adage for me is always like this, numbers alone, they don't really inspire people, but what you sort of learn from the whole thing, trying to get there, the path you walk and whatnot, it does have a lot of value and a lot of learnings you can take from it. And sometimes those learnings are very, very important. I think about the numerous amounts of times where sitting in meeting sessions where you've found core business value that's not aligned with the business itself, that's essentially spun off as a separate entity, just because you had a look at the numbers and go like, this is interesting, maybe this is something else we could do. It's not an objective for us right now, but this is some intrinsic value to it. Let's maybe put a group of people there and essentially push that as well, which would be super, super, super valuable.
Yeah. So looking back on some of the situations where we were really trying to be highly focused, saying no to things so that we can focus on the most important, a lot of times the basis for saying no is not that ruthless optimization. It's a lack of belief in the value of the work being proposed. So we don't have something more important to work on. We just don't believe that this is important enough to work on. So we're going to look for something else. And I guess I would caution in, just as a counterbalance to the ruthless optimization and the focus on focus, I would counter that sometimes, there's that big failure that you project. Hey, if we say yes to this, I know the tech behind it. I know other companies that have tried it. I know it's going to lead to failure. And you may be right. You probably are right. But maybe the big success or an opportunity for big success is over that hill. So you've got to go through that failure to get there as an organization, maybe not as an individual. So I would just put that into perspective as saying sometimes the stretch is not just in the metrics, but also in your biases and your beliefs and your experience. Kind of be open to going against your own naturalistic. I mean, I'm not saying if there are more important things that you have more confidence in, yes, then say no. But if you're just saying no because you don't have belief and you're going to go look for something else, well, if you don't find it, go back and say yes. Stretch.
Embrace that sort of explorer mentality a little bit, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Good point. Yeah, I'm trying to think of a relevant example for me, but I think the correlation out of that with regards to, again, just stepping outside of your box, get comfortable with being uncomfortable. There's sometimes a lot of value in there. And I mean, if you don't realize that we live in a world where change is constant, I mean, it could be an opportunity for you. Why not? What do you reckon, Matey?
Yeah, totally agree. This is something that risk taking is really bring you to the different level. And if you don't take any risk. If you don't fail, it means you did not really work on something that was aspirational. And from my perspective also is supposed to be within the organization in a way that people are really encouraged to take risk and see where it can take them. Also within good organizations, sometimes they bring people from different background, not only people that they had experience within that industry, but bring people from different background, and they try to see when fresh eyes come to the organization, how they see the problem. Sometimes they tackle it in really, really easy way that it was in your blind side. You could not even think of it, but because they come from different industry, different background, they can contribute to your organization this way. Google, it's among those organizations that they are doing this proactively, that they bring people from different industries and experience and give them enough room to explore. That 20% of time that it's for their own, it's mainly working on especially this kind of a stretching goal and aspirational OKR. Also, something that it goes hand in hand with OKR is CFR, which is conversation, feedback, and recognition. And it's enabler for OKR to make things happen. We discuss about it, mainly we cover it within our first chapter, but also to just say it out loud, CFR is the sibling of OKR, that they are using it for like make things happen, bring things to home. One thing also I wanted to discuss about was Bill Campbell. This was something that they closed the chapter with, Bill Campbell Memorial. Bill Campbell was a football coach, but come into the Silicon Valley, and he was mentoring big organizations like Google, Apple, so many other famous people and organizations, and teach them how to use OKR, how to leverage on CFR to bring things to better shape. There is a book called $1 Trillion Coach that discuss about Bill Campbell and who was he within the Silicon Valley. They're saying if there is one asset that is most valuable within the whole Silicon Valley, this is Bill Campbell. That's why the name of the book, $1 Trillion Coach.
I mean, it makes so much sense, because if we talk about data-driven, is there anything more immediate than having a team of athletes walk onto a field in a public setting with a direct feedback of tens of thousands of people sitting there, and then having to perform against odds to essentially either win or lose a match? Is there anything that is more sort of like data-driven and immediate that? I mean, if we always talk about in my industry about real-time metrics, I don't think you can beat anything other than a situation like that. So it's interesting for me how a lot of that sports metaphors and the way a team is built, that this formative trust, being able to walk away from a loss and not having it destroy you, and being able to capitalize on the win and building that momentum, that Bill Campbell essentially brought into Silicon Valley within its formative kind of like stages. The show Ted Lasso for me is something that I watch once a year, because it sort of embodies what I would say that same coaching mentality from a sports perspective that is so relevant to us. We just see it from a different lens, and we don't have maybe that immediate feedback that's either good or bad. We just live that world in enterprises and in organizations just on a more stretched time frame. And I think this is where sort of the measurement and the sort of like stretching and tracking sort of comes in for me as well, because we need to keep an eye on the ball. The problem is our ball doesn't move that fast, kind of like thing. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I mean, the sports metaphors are very apropos. I'm reminded of a boxer who lost the fight, and there was a rematch being discussed, and he was asked, "What are you going to do in the rematch?" He said, "Try to win." So, I guess that's the O, and he didn't really mention the KRs. Like, what exactly are you going to do? That's going to be different from last time. But no, I totally appreciate the correlation between athletic performance or any highly skilled, highly visible instant feedback medium, whether it be stage acting or musicians or whatever. They're going to know from ticket sales, from everything very quickly. If they're bombing, they're going to know from the audience if they're booing. These are kind of immediate feedback loops for sure.
Amazing.
All right, then this was our chapter 3, and which we discussed about tracking and stretching. This chapter was quite a lot to cover, and we just touch at different points with the things that resonate with us. But this book, it gives you quite a lot of information. Is highly recommended. I really appreciate all the nice story from Pat and Willem. It was really great and enjoyable chapter. Is there any closing thought from you, Willem or Pat?
I would say I like it when I walk away from a book with a new set of terms and language that I feel casts a wide enough net that I can have conversations, not just with leadership, but actually with team members as well. And I like the language in this book. If you only take that away after reading it, I think it's very, very valuable for everybody within an organization to at least read it once, just because it frames and gives you a couple of ways of talking to other people within your organization. That is very, very valuable. That's it for me. Pat, over to you.
Yeah, I'd like to add another analogy to the list of analogies that people use to describe OKRs. I tend to think of it as a body. Mission, vision, and values I think of as the soul and the brains of the company. And its muscles are the people, the individuals working at the company. OKRs then would be the nervous system, in that they're bi-directional. They command the muscles in a sense, right? They align and instruct what needs to be done, but they also give those feedbacks in terms of metrics on when you stub your toe, when there's pain. So for me, that's what OKRs represent, is the actual nervous system.
Good one.
Is that a bad analogy?
Good one.
Yeah, thanks. It was a really nice analogy. Thank you, Pat. Thanks, everybody, that you were with us on this chapter on episode 6. Looking forward to see you in next episode. And thank you very much for all the feedback that you gave us. Please reach out if you would like to be part of our podcast. We can discuss about it. Have a wonderful one. Cheers, everyone.
Bed, all the best, man. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Cheers. Thanks, guys.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.